Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava Metzia. We are up to Perek Daled, Mishna Yud Alayev. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Veliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Chana ben Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam beGan Eden Amen. And Le'avdi ben Chaim L'Chaim v'Derefua Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betor Shah Cholei Israel and Achlama Merav Binyamin Or Tzion Chai ben Dvorah. The final two Mishnayot in our chapter discuss a third type of hona'ah, unethical business practices. This Mishnah addresses selling merchandise that is mixed with something else. En ma'arvin perot beperot, a seller may not mix produce, grain from one of his fields into produce from another of his fields. If he specifically told the buyer that he is giving him grain from one of the fields, afilu chadashim b'chadashim, even if he wants to mix new grain from one field into new grain from the other field, in which case there is no difference in the quality of the grains. Then tzich lomar chadashim bishanim, and it goes without saying that he may not mix new grain into old grain if he promised the buyer old grain, because old grain has certain advantages over new grain. Old grain has dried out and it therefore produces more flour when it is ground. Be'emet bayayin itiru la'arev kasher berach. In truth, now the Gemara on page 60 in Metzia says that this expression indicates that the Rachav follows the ruling that will now be stated. Be'emet, in truth, with regard to wine, the sages did permit a seller to mix sharp wine into mellow wine, because the sharp wine improves it. The sharp wine makes the mellow wine last longer before spoiling and turning into vinegar. Now this applies only when the wines are mixed right after they are pressed. Afterward, though, each wine has already developed its own character, and mixing them will just ruin them both, as the Gemara says on page 68 with the commentary of Rashi. Therefore, if he agreed to sell him mellow wine, he may mix some sharp wine into it. Again, when this is applying when the wines are mixed right after they are pressed. Now, the Rav explains they did not permit mixing mellow wine into sharp wine. Therefore, if he agreed to sell him sharp wine, he may not mix mellow wine into it. Now, wine usually contains sediment at the bottom of the container. This comes from the tiny particles of grape that remain in the wine, which eventually settle to the bottom of the container. Therefore, when an entire jug or barrel of wine is sold, the buyer realizes he will be getting a certain amount of sediment in it. The Mishnah teaches the law for a smaller amount of wine that is sold and is poured from the top of the container without any sediment. En ma'avin shimrei yain beyain, a seller may not mix wine sediment from one barrel into clear wine from another barrel, because that ruins the wine. Avanoten lo et shmarav, but he may give the buyer sediment from its own barrel. Meaning, when he takes wine from the barrel, he may add some sediment from that barrel to the wine he poured off and include it in the sale to the buyer. That sediment does not ruin the wine at all, nor is he cheating the buyer, since if one were to buy the entire container of wine, it would include sediment. When the seller pours off some into the buyer's container, he may give him some of that sediment. Now, it is forbidden to dilute wine that is being sold, meaning that this is clearly dishonest, since the buyer is paying for pure wine, not wine mixed with water. The Mishnah discusses what should be done with wine that had become diluted with water. If water got mixed into someone's wine, he should not sell it in the store in small amounts to individual customers, unless he tells the customers that there is water mixed into the wine. And he should not sell it to a wine merchant, even if he does tell him that there is water mixed into it, because there is concern that it is being bought by the merchant only to cheat his customers. The merchant might be planning to sell the diluted wine to his customers without informing them that it was diluted. Although we do not ordinarily suspect the person of being dishonest, wine merchants are more likely to justify doing this because they were not the ones who diluted it and did not even see it happen. However, in a place where it is customary to add water to the wine and sell it that way, yatilu, sellers may add water because the buyers understand that they are getting diluted wine. And that is the end of Mishnah Yud Aleph. Mishnah Yud Bet continues the discussion of a seller mixing items together. Hatagar notel mechamesh geranot v'noten etoch migua achat. A merchant may take, meaning he may buy grain from 5 threshing places of 5 different people and put all the grain into one granary. Mechamesh gitot v'noten etoch pitam echad. And he may take wine from 5 wine presses and put it all into one vat. Because buyers are aware that wholesale merchants typically do this. Wholesale merchants buy grain or wine from several farms or vineyards and mix it all together. Since buyers know this, the merchant is not cheating them by selling them mixed merchandise. But this is only as long as the merchant does not intend to mix a little bit of low quality merchandise into mostly high quality merchandise, while having buyers believe that it is all high quality. Meaning, he may not buy most of the merchandise from a high quality supplier and only a little from a low quality supplier, so that word gets out that he sells high quality merchandise. The buyer then thinks that all his merchandise is high quality, so that when he mixes some low quality merchandise into it, he is cheating them. The Mishnah now addresses a number of business practices that are designed to lure customers away from other dealers. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo yechalek hachenvani kilayot ve'egozin hatinokot. A storekeeper should not give out toasted wheat kernels and nuts to the children who visit his store, because he accustoms them to come to him. He thereby undermines the businesses of other storekeepers in the area. When the parents send their children to the store, they will choose to go to the storekeeper who gives out snacks, as Rashi explains in Bava Batra, page 21b. But the Mishnah says the sages permit this because you can tell the other storekeepers that if they want the children to come, they should give out even better snacks. Now, Rabbi Yehuda continues, V'lo yivchot dashar. A storekeeper should also not lower the price below that of the rest of the market, because this too causes other storekeepers to lose business. But the sages say, Zachur letov, he is remembered for good for doing this, because it pushes all the storekeepers to lower their prices and thereby benefits the public. Typically, some merchants would wait to sell their own produce until the market basically ran out, and they would then put it up for sale at a high price. The buyers would therefore lose out. If, however, one merchant sells his produce early on for lower than the market price, then those merchants are afraid that people might buy everything they need from him, and there will be no one left to buy their produce. They therefore put everything on the market now at the lower price, and all the buyers benefit. And the Rav does tell us that that is the halakha. The halakha follows the opinion of the sages. The Mishnah discusses things that a seller does to make his merchandise look better. Lo yavor et grisin. A seller may not sift the waste from crushed beans, because removing the waste does not justify the much higher price he will charge for these nicer looking beans. Although a pound of unsifted beans contains, let's say, 5% of waste, he will raise the price by 20% because the beans now look nicer. Divrei Abba Shaul, these are the words of Abba Shaul. V'chachamim matirin, but the sages permit this because the customer is not being fooled. Rather, he is willing to pay the much higher price for being saved the trouble of sifting. The sages assume that the customer is quite capable of comparing the sifted beans to unsifted ones and see how much waste was removed. His decision to pay much more for the sifted ones is for the service of sifting provided by the seller. And that is the halakha. The Rav does tell us the halakha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. Umodim shelo yavor ma'al pi megura. However, the sages agree that the seller may not sift only those beans on the top of the bin, while leaving the beans underneath unsifted. Sheno ela kegonev et ha'ayin, because this is just deceiving the eye of the buyer. Even if the seller tells the buyer that there is waste underneath the top layer of the beans, the buyer is still somewhat misled into thinking that there is not so much waste there. En mefarkesin lo et ha'adam. One may not artificially improve the look of whatever one is selling, not that of a person that cannot eat slave, v'lo et ha'behema, nor that of an animal, v'lo et ha'kelim, nor that of utensils, because he deceives the buyer into thinking that he is getting something better than he really is. For example, he may not dye the white hairs of an older slave black to make him look younger, or give an animal bran water to drink before bringing it to the market to make it look fatter, or put a new coat of paint on an old utensil to make it look new. However, one may make new utensils look nice so that people will be attracted to buying them, as long as he does not make them look like something they are not. And that is Anabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.